Hi, I'm Dr. Brian Thornburg, and are you considering a home birth or working with a midwife? We have 8 children. 5 of them were born by midwife. So I'm very versed in this, and I can also look at it from 2 angles. I can look at it as a parent, and I can also look at this from a pediatrician's perspective. I want to make sure that you don't get tripped up because I have lots of families in my practice that use midwives. Sometimes I have an issue with the way that the new baby is handed to me. So I want to make sure that you don't trip up and have a problem with your pediatrician, especially somebody who may not have the same experience that I have, and then they will have kind of a bias against your approach or possibly dismiss you from the practice. Our history in moving from a traditional birth into having 5 home deliveries with a midwife was a journey. We were in training, both doctors, and obviously I'm a pediatrician, and I had noticed from going to C-sections, because as a pediatric resident, I'm required to attend all C-sections when I had that assignment from my residency. Going to C-sections, I noticed that the babies came out a little bit more sluggish. And it wasn't just the C-section, it was the fact that the mom had been given an epidural. And the epidural, while it's not supposed to leave mom's spinal cord, or at least that is the story that the anesthesiologists say, sometimes I noticed that the babies came out more sluggish if mom received an epidural, and then they would need to have more intervention to resuscitate them, or their APGARs might be lower. And so I suggested to my wife, why don't we have a natural delivery? And of course, her response is, it's not you delivering the baby, I'm going to make the decision. And of course, I stepped off. It was true. I'm not delivering the baby. I'm not the one that has to go through the event. And so I will defer to you. Not much was said for the next several weeks. And then she returns to me just out of the blue, not knowing that she was still pondering the idea of having some type of natural delivery. Then she says, how about a water birth at home? And of course, now she had taken me from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds, kind of similar, but to a much greater extent than I had when suggesting no epidural. And I was like, whoa. I don't know about doing this. Only thing I knew was traditional deliveries. Everything I knew from my friends that were in medical school, now in residency. My roommate was an OB or was OB training at the time. He said, no way, don't do that. So I had a heavy bias against having a home delivery. My wife said, well, why don't we just go speak to the midwife and we'll decide. And so we went and met with the midwife, and she said, I understand your hesitancy. Here's a video. Why don't you watch this? Now understand, this is 2001. So she hands me a VHS tape. So we go home, I put it in the player, and I hit play. If I didn't have a good sense of humor and kind of an understanding of hippiness, I don't know how I would have reacted to this video, but basically she gave me a video of water births, but not in a tub in a house. They were seaside water births somewhere in Eastern Europe, and not just the mom delivering, but there was a little community of men and women, everybody naked, standing by the sea while this woman gave birth. And then they start flipping the baby up by their feet. And I was like, this is like wackadoo. Are you kidding me? This is my introduction to home deliveries, is a seaside village with a bunch of naked people running around. I went back to her and I said, I don't know that this is something that we're looking for. We're certainly not looking for this kind of experience, especially in Augusta, Georgia, down by the Savannah River. And she said, no, it's the only video I had, but you could see how easy it was to deliver the baby. I don't know about that. And unfortunately, she had to step off of the delivery. There was a family emergency, and so she could no longer deliver. So that we were left back scratching our heads, and we had learned that there was an OB in our area who had practiced for about 20 years in Alaska and had become very comfortable doing home deliveries. So we called him up and asked if he would deliver the baby for us, and he said he would. We also, and this is one of the important points, we also then shadowed with an OB that would work at the hospital. The OB that we were having to come to the house did not have hospital privileges. So we shadowed with an OB that had hospital privileges in case something went wrong, because you don't want to walk into a hospital, 11th hour crisis situation, because obviously you're not going to the hospital if you're planning a home delivery with a midwife, unless it's an absolute emergency. So you don't want to roll into the hospital not knowing who you're going to work with. We had this OB, and interestingly enough, they had trained together, both the OB that was delivering at the house and the OB that would deliver at the hospital, and they knew each other. And so they said hi to each other through us. So that's point 1. Make sure you shadow with an OB. Point 2, have a doula. We had a doula. That way the OB can do what they need to do. The OB doesn't have to worry about taking care of mom, baby, dad, in case dad starts to become concerned about what's happening. Everybody will have kind of an attendant then. So we have the midwife that's kind of overseeing everything, the doula that's just focused on mom and helping mom, and then dad can kind of have that space that he needs to help mom as needed, or if dad isn't able to process the delivery, then he can kind of sit aside without feeling bad sad because mom doesn't have somebody to help her. So a doula is really, really important. The next part is understand how to handle an emergency situation. So you want to speak with your OB, the one that can admit to the hospital, and make sure that you have a plan in case things go south. So you want to have certain criteria to know that you need to leave the house. With one of our attempted home births, we did have to pull the trigger. We had to say, this is no longer safe. We need to go to the hospital, and we had an emergency C-section. That was orchestrated. We had an OB at the house. We had a midwife at the house. We had 2 chiropractors at the house. We had me as a pediatrician and the wife who was an emergency medicine doctor. And once we saw that the baby just kept spin and breech, no matter how much we tried, and she was in active labor, we said we had to go to the hospital. There's no way we can spin the baby here at the 11th hour, and we don't want to have a problem at home. So know that there are limitations to using a midwife, and you need to know when to pull the trigger to go to the hospital for safety for the baby. Next, when the baby comes out, remember they check mom for routine labs at the beginning of pregnancy and then again around 34 weeks of pregnancy. And that's to look for sexually transmitted diseases. So they're going to check for syphilis, they're going to check for HIV, they're going to check for hepatitis B, they're going to check for herpes, they're going to check for a few other diseases. And if mom is group B strep positive but does not want to take the antibiotics, and the midwife says that's okay, you don't have to take the antibiotic, this is where families trip up with me, because if you don't take the antibiotic and mom is group B strep, and now you come into my office and I now have a baby who has a 1 to 2% chance of developing early onset group B strep, and that can be fatal. And now you're asking me as a pediatrician to help take care of this baby in a secure, safe, evidence-based fashion. Now we're crossing the line because now we're not being evidence-based. I can understand a mom saying, I don't want to have the antibiotic because of what it does to the microbiome and what it can do to the baby down the line, because we know moms who receive antibiotics at delivery, those babies will go on to have a higher chance, higher likelihood of developing allergies, whether it's eczema, asthma, or just regular seasonal or perennial allergies. I can understand a mom saying no, but if that's the path that you're choosing, then you have to understand that there is a new obstacle in the way, which is when the baby comes out, we have to stick the baby for blood, an intravenous stick. That means here in the elbow or somewhere that we have a good vein, and we have to send blood off for a CBC or a complete blood count, as well as a blood culture and possibly some inflammation markers. It's really important that if you're choosing not to give the antibiotic to mom, that we have to check the baby, because you can't ask, again, the pediatrician to say, be responsible for the health and safety and welfare of my baby, but I'm not going to do what is evidence-based as safe. Those are the points that I recommend that you follow when you're picking a midwife. Be together on the decision, be mutual, and understand the risk and the benefits of a home delivery. Make sure that you have a shadowed OB so you can go to the hospital in case things go sideways. Have a doula and make sure that she can help mom. And then last, make sure that you are using evidence-based medicine so you and the pediatrician can have a healthy working relationship. I hope that this helps you navigate this growing and beautiful space. Thanks. Bye-bye.